All right, well, we're back and let's talk about meta emotion. I'm sure you've heard the term metacognition. That's a really commonly used term in psychology these days. When I was a student, it was a kind of new word. And meta, whenever you use the word meta as a prefix, you're really talking about like awareness. So when you talk about metacognition, you're talking about your awareness of your cognitive style or what you're thinking. Meta emotion is going to be the same basic idea, your awareness of your emotions. So we introduced the mood awareness test. Well, let's talk about what we know about people's awareness of their emotions. Now, John Gottman, who's mentioned in our Ekman book a few times, coined this term to describe how one feels about one's own emotions as well as the emotions of other family members. Gottman is a research therapist, and he's gotten quite famous thanks to his research on how people talk to each other in relationships and what that really says about their relationship and the health of their relationship. He's now really super famous and can command like $3,000 a weekend to go for couples counseling out on one of the islands in the San Juan Island chain. So anyway, giving you a little context on John Gottman. So meta emotion, according to Gottman, is how we understand and feel about our own emotions and how we understand and feel about the emotions that are being expressed by the people who are close to us. All right, here we have a little smiley expressing an emotion. And so if he's having meta emotion, he might be saying, I'm happy that I'm happy, right? So I'm aware of it and it's how I feel about my emotion. I'm happy that I'm having this emotion. Here is not a happy smiley face. This is an angry smiley. That's contradictory. So our smiley face, his meta emotion is I'm embarrassed that I'm upset, right? So the emotion is upset. The meta emotion is I'm embarrassed that I'm upset. People have been talking about this concept for a while and trying to decide whether it's helpful or harmful. Like, is this actually helping us to understand emotions to talk about it like this? And so one researcher said, how far down the rabbit hole can we go with this meta emotion? Like, I'm angry that I'm embarrassed that I'm upset, right? Like, well, now I'm happy to recognize that I'm angry, that I'm embarrassed, that I'm upset. Like, how far down this hole can we go of being like piling on emotions to describe our awareness of the emotion that we're experiencing? So I thought I'd throw that in there for you because that is a lot to think about. Now, if you recall back in our first module, I had you take the need for affect scale. Or is it this module? I can't remember when we did the need for affect scale. I think it was the first one. So some of you, you should have your score and you should know whether you are a person who's more, on the high end for the need for affect or more on the low end, something like that. Research has shown that people who are higher in the need for affect are less likely to find meta emotional experience enjoyable. People who are higher in the need for affect are less likely to want to talk about how they feel about the feelings that they're having. And people who are lower for the need for affect are more willing to spend that time thinking about that stuff. One implication about meta emotion is that it can really contribute to a circle of emotion where you say, okay, I'm aware that I'm anxious, that I'm feeling anxiety right now, and that makes me scared. To be aware that I'm starting to have those first little inklings of anxiety, right? So I feel those inklings. I know that that's how I feel when I'm starting to get anxious, and the awareness that I'm starting to feel anxious is making me feel anxious. And you could get into this circle where you're making, especially those negative emotions. It could be a circle the other direction too. I'm happy that I'm happy. That could build greater happiness. That's positive. We're probably not that concerned about that. I'm more concerned about when the awareness that I'm starting to enter the beginnings of a negative emotion could make me feel stronger emotions about the fact that I'm going into that emotion. And it can really facilitate the development of these negative emotions. So I thought I'd throw that in about emotional, the metacognition. Now, what about emotional contagion? We talked in the last series of lectures about, when people make facial expressions, we may react with similar facial expressions and take on their emotions. let's talk a little bit more about that kind of emotional contagion. Research has shown that therapists tend to catch their clients' feelings. It's one of the biggest risks of being a therapist is that you start to take on some of the emotions that are brought into the therapy session. And so that's why most therapists are in therapy, right? So we just keep passing it on, right? Parents communicate their feelings to their children and can cause them to get upset or excited or whatever the parents are feeling. And then vice versa. The moods that kids wake up in can impact the parents' whole day, right? These are, it's a two-way street of emotional contagion in relationships. I'd like to say that about the therapist too, by the way. The therapist's emotions and the way that they manage them and stuff like that can cause their clients to internalize that also. Friends resonate with each other's moods. You don't want to go out with your friend who's in a down mood, do you? Because you don't want that friend to pull you down. But then on the other hand, you're like, well, why don't you come out with us and you'll feel better? We'll help you to feel our emotions, but don't bring us down with your emotion. So it's kind of, we can resonate each other's moods. We can really build on that. Most of us perk up when those around us are elated, or we're more likely to become, and I don't mean clinically depressed, but a little bit more depressed if they are experiencing unusual sadness, right? We tend to take on other people's moods. It's part of, like I said in the last time I was talking about this, when people yawn, we tend to yawn too. We're sensitive to the emotional states that other people are in, or the transitions physiologically they're experiencing. That's what yawning is about. So emotional contagion is a real thing. We do react to each other's emotions and take them on. Research has shown that those who are high in empathy are able to mimic the facial expressions of others as measured by that facial electromyography that Ekman talks about a little bit, in less than half a second. So people who are high in empathy, it takes them less than half a second, less than 500 milliseconds to put that facial expression onto their own faces. This might be due in part to mirror neurons. Just occurred to me that I should have brought that up. So I'm going to put into the playlist a video on mirror neurons for you to watch. Because we may have been born with a predisposition to be able to take on other people's emotional states. And you'll see that in the video I'll implant into this playlist about mirror neurons. Big picture. Why should we care about all this stuff? Well, there is agreement about at least 6 main emotions: sadness, anger, fear, surprise, disgust, and joy/happiness. There's debate on the remaining 2 to 4 emotions that were offered by different theorists. But evidence is accumulating that suggests that emotions are complex blends of neural activity, that there's not a single happiness area or sadness area or something. Emotions must be at least partly innate because evidence for them emerges so early. Babies wouldn't be able to do the facial expressions that they do if they weren't to some degree pre-wired. Now I'm going to qualify that really quickly, and I probably should have done it earlier when I was talking about this before, so I'm going to stick it in here. Babies aren't born with it. The first social smile, where a baby's actually smiling at their caregiver or something, tends to emerge about 3 to 4 months after birth. So babies aren't initially able to express that kind of emotion. But 3 to 4 months is pretty darn quick. It's not like, people have been smiling at them their whole lives. So maybe they're just really quick learners and, respond in kind. That's possible. But it's also possible, the fact that they emerge so early implies that it's at least partially innate. People differ on how much they enjoy analyzing their moods and emotions. Just like we talked about previously, people differ on a lot of these emotional things. How much they like to think about it, how much they express things, how they label or how they reappraise versus suppress. We vary on all these things. And so it's really important to realize that, our own personal emotional experience is not necessarily the same as somebody else's. They may not enjoy the thinking about it or the expressing of it to the degree that we do. That analyzing of moods and emotions, we now have a word for it called meta-emotion. So we call that process meta-emotion. And some people appreciate meta-emotion more than other people do. Honestly, some people enjoy metacognition more than other people do. Like some people like to think about their thinking styles and how to think better and how to remember things more effectively and all those things that go along with metacognition. And other people are like not wanting to do that kind of self-reflection. So I mean, people vary on these things. So our final idea is that, you know, people are subject to emotional contagion, and this is a great time to remind you the next thing coming up is going to be a nice video on one possible explanation for why we're subject to emotional contagion, and that is the fact that we have mirror neurons in our brains. So enjoy that video.